Welcome along to our event, Young People in Europe, Findings from the European Social Survey. We're holding this event to recognise the coming to the conclusion of the European Year of Youth. Today we've got 5 talks for you, all in some way focusing on an element of the youth experience. Each of our papers will consist of something like a 20-minute presentation, after which there will be a short period for a few questions. So if you have questions as the presenters are working their way through their paper, please put these in the Q&A so I can harvest these as quickly as possible at the end of the talk and make sure that we address 2 or 3 questions after each paper. I'm Eric Harrison. I'm Deputy Director of the European Social Survey at headquarters. And once again, you're very welcome to this afternoon's event. Without further ado, I'd now like to move to the first of our speakers this afternoon. The first paper is from Alina Cosma and Gina Martin, and Alina will be first to speak. Alina, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Eric, for the introduction. Together with Gina, we will present this. She'll handle the slides. So as Eric has said, we are very happy to be here to be able to present some of the work that we've been doing using the European Social Survey, the 2016-2017 data. So we will start this discussion by walking you through our research that looked at climate change concerns and mental well-being in a subsample a subsample containing young people from the European Social Survey. And we hope that we will convince you that this is an important topic, and we want to emphasize that this is a work in progress, and the manuscript is ready for submission. However, we welcome your feedback and suggestions on how we could improve this. Next slide. So we think that climate change needs no introduction at this stage, nor does the awareness of the negative impacts that climate change can have on individuals' health and well-being. As emphasized by this graph from CDC, there is a wide range of negative health impacts on humans' health, and this has prompted world stakeholders to acknowledge that climate change, it is the greatest health threat of the century, and it should be treated as such. Next slide. However, it is important to acknowledge that beyond the immediate health effects that climate change can have on individuals, there is upcoming research that shows that climate change can also have a strong negative impact on mental health and well-being. And then compared to the other health areas, the mental health impacts of climate change have received less research attention, and there are less systematic empirical papers that have explored this. Next slide. And it's important to sort of outline first the theoretical pathways to which climate change can impact mental health. So on one hand, there are direct impacts, and these are mental health problems that can emerge in the immediate follow-up of experiencing an extreme weather event such as hurricane, wildfire, floods, and these are mostly associated with a post-traumatic stress type of acute response. However, in the literature, there's also an indication of the indirect impacts, and these are the mental health consequences that occur from having to deal with the disruption and damages to day-to-day life. And for example, there is a lot of research that has looked at the negative impact that experiencing long-term drought can have on populations' levels of mental health. Next slide. However, there is more and more research that actually shows that just being aware and having a high awareness of climate change can activate emotional distress and can interfere with mental health. And our research follows this pathway and this line of research. Next slide. And of course, there is an increased media attention and increased research that actually looks at young people as being the group that is more likely to experience these negative emotions in relation to climate change. However, next slide, to make things even more complicated, we talked about climate change, we talked about mental health. However, in the literature, there's a focus on eco-emotions, and these are the psychological responses to negative changes that we see that are occurring and that are associated with climate change. And in this sort of broader conceptual framework, different researchers talk about the stress, anxiety, and worry, and these can be seen as sort of immediate outcomes or implications of climate change awareness, but they could also be seen as drivers of mental health problems. Next slide. And it is important to also acknowledge that experiencing negative emotional responses, such as worry, to climate crisis, it is rational and is a potentially functional reaction, as it can, for example, act as a motivator to action, to take responsibility and change something about one's behavior. But at the same time, it can be overwhelming and it can interfere with individuals' ability to function. And this is when we would expect negative associations with mental health. And as such, next slide, we are building this work on for example, a systematic review that Gina has published actually a year ago, in which she synthesized all the evidence around this association between climate change awareness and young people's mental health. And it became obvious that there are a lot of publications out there, but many of them are editorials or commentaries. And out of the few empirical research that was published on this topic, most of it stems from Europe, North America, and Australia. And most studies addressed negative emotions or feelings such as anxiety and worry. However, there were also mentions about distress, guilty, powerless, helplessness. And this has prompted us to look at ESS, as we knew that it had the measure on climate change worry. Next slide. And to sort of emphasize why it is important to look at young people, they are a group that is at a disproportional risk to experience the implications of climate change. And on one hand, they are more vulnerable to the direct effects of extreme heat, drought, or all the natural disasters, but also, as showcased by Gina in this systematic review, only the overarching awareness of climate change, it can have a negative impact on young people's mental well-being and emotions. Next slide. And with that in mind, we sort of identified a few gaps. Although there is research published so much, most of it relies on convenience non-representative samples, and there's not that much research that has used a cross-national approach where combining data from more countries, and also not that many studies actually focus on young people, nor do they explore, for example, age and gender effects, as we know that in relation to mental well-being and emotional distress, there are strong age and gender effects. And also, not that many moderators in these associations are being explored. And with that in mind, our research questions we had three main research questions. On one hand, we wanted to test whether there's an association between mental well-being and worry about climate change in representative samples of young people across Europe, and whether there is an association between mental well-being and belief about personal responsibility in relation to climate change. And third, we wanted to explore whether age, gender, and frequency of climate change thoughts moderates the association between the dimensions mentioned above. And now I'll hand it to Gina to walk you through our methods and results.
Thanks, Alina, and thanks, Eric, for the introduction. So just picking up from there, like Alina said, we had identified, that there were a lot of studies that had been done that had grouped young people in with older populations, but because this is such a distinct cohort, especially when faced with the increasing awareness of climate change in our society, we wanted to look just at young people. So we were able to do that with the European Social Survey. And we felt very fortunate that we came across round 8 sort of through our work doing systematic reviews and looking at these sort of studies that have been using these questions. And we realized that we were able to really tease into this module in order to try to pull out some of these items around climate change to understand, what young people are experiencing. So the way we did this is we limited the data set to those who were 15 to 35. So sort of the school-aged adolescent group, as well as younger adults. So that left us with about 12,000 participants. And then we decided that we would exclude those who said they definitely did not think the world's climate is changing. And that was actually a very small proportion. So only 2.4% responded that way. And that was just because they might have a very different view and they might be perceiving the questions that were being asked differently. So we wanted to kind of keep it to the group who potentially were worried about climate change and were thinking about it in this way. So when we were thinking about mental well-being, we used 2 outcomes, and we looked at positive mental well-being. So we looked at items around happiness and life satisfaction. So that's actually something that is another addition to the literature. There's not a lot of studies, but the studies that do exist tend to look at things like depression or generalized anxiety. So sort of the link between climate worry and whether there's an association with these more generalized feelings of mentally unwellness. So we wanted to move more to mental well-being, and also these were variables that were available in the data set. So that using secondary data is always helpful. And then we had our 2 main predictors of interest. So as Alina talked about, we had climate change worry, and we felt this was, kind of a key one to tease out, but also it was the item that kind of teased into emotions around climate change, and that's what we wanted to get at. And this was measured on a 5-point scale, so people could say they were not worried at all to being extremely worried. And then we were also worried about beliefs about personal responsibility regarding climate change. So this was addressed by asking, to what extent do you feel a personal responsibility to try to reduce climate change? And the reason we wanted to get at that is because there's a bit of a mixed idea that, feeling personal responsibility could, on one hand, be part of self-efficacy and could lead to improvements, or could be felt by people who are experiencing positive mental well-being. But on the other hand, feeling a sense of personal responsibility about something so overwhelming and really a global issue could have the opposite effect. So we didn't really have a hypothesis about the direction that this could potentially go. And then we had our important covariates and moderators. So we included urbanicity, household income, self-identification of being an ethnic minority in the country where the survey was undertaken. And then we also included a measure about worry about power supply due to terrorist attacks. And this was used as a bit of a proxy measure because we wanted to account for the fact that people who are potentially worried about climate change and also who potentially could have lower mental well-being could be people who are worried a lot in general. So climate change could just be one aspect of many things that someone's worried about. And so we wanted to kind of be able to account for that in a bit of a proxy way. So this is another worry item, but it doesn't have to do with climate change. And then we included our key moderators. So we included age, we included gender. So we knew from the previous literature that young women do tend to worry more about climate change and also feel more personal responsibility. And then we included frequency of thoughts about climate change. And that's really that if climate change is taking up a lot of your mind, then we would expect the link between worry and mental well-being to be stronger. And again, we weren't really sure about the link that would occur with personal responsibility, but we wanted to test that out as well. We used multi-level models within country clustering to account for the fact that there could be unaccounted for variables that would vary across countries that could influence happiness and life satisfaction. So first of all, we modeled climate change worry on our mental well-being outcomes, and we controlled for our important covariates. And then we added beliefs about personal responsibility to the model to see what would happen to the model. And then we included our interaction terms one by one. So our models aren't a set with multiple interaction terms. We added each one individually, more for ease of interpretation. So when we looked at the data, so these are 15 to 35-year-olds, what we see is, on the extreme ends, those who felt not at all worried about climate change or extremely worried, we saw about 6% of the participants respond in such a way. Where we see kind of the greatest number of participants is in the somewhat and very worried. So this is similar to other findings that are highlighting that, climate change worry is prevalent among young people in the population. And what we find is when we're looking at it on the 5-point Likert scale, it's, not too many at the very extreme end, but it's, a lot of people who are saying, they are somewhat or very worried. And then when we looked at to what extent people are feeling personal responsibility to reduce climate change, this was measured on a 0 to 10 scale, 0 being not at all, and 10 being a great deal. We find, the mean is about in the middle, so 5.53. So, yeah. So then when we looked at our models, what we found is that those who were worried about climate change did have significantly lower happiness and life satisfaction compared to those who are not worried at all. So when we look at life satisfaction, it's only those who are extremely worried compared to those who are not at all worried who see a significant decrease in life satisfaction. But along climate change worry, we see sort of a more linear and statistically significant patterning in the coefficients. When we added in beliefs about personal responsibility, what we found was actually that it was a negative confounder. So by adding that in, we saw that the effect of worry on mental well-being actually increased in terms of effect size. And we found that beliefs around personal responsibility were actually positively associated with happiness and life satisfaction. And when we included our interaction terms, what we found that was interesting was actually that age, gender, and frequency of climate change thoughts were not significant moderators between the worry and mental well-being relationship. So that was somewhat surprising. And so what we can conclude from that is that, even though worry is higher among young women, the slope of the relationship is consistent across age, gender, and frequency of thoughts. However, when we looked at personal responsibility about climate change, what we did see some interaction effects, particularly around frequency of climate change thoughts. And so if you look at this graph, you can see the green line represents those who have high frequency of climate change thoughts. And on the axis, the y-axis, that's their happiness, average predicted happiness level. And what we see is that those who don't feel any personal responsibility, but are thinking about climate change a lot, actually have the lowest happiness. And then those who actually feel a great responsibility and are thinking about climate change a lot have quite high happiness. So we thought that was quite interesting. So what can we make of this? Well, our findings about worry being associated with mental well-being, and particularly our slant that we're looking at more positive mental well-being, is in line with other studies that looked at just Norwegian youth or Filipino youth. So we're starting to see a bit of a consistency appear out of the literature. And also a sense of responsibility to act on climate change could be a protective factor for well-being among adolescents and young adults who are growing up in this changing world and facing the climate crisis. So we think there's some promising aspects there that could be teased out a little bit more in further study. Sort of more broadly, thinking around this sort of field, the study of emotions about climate change is really in its infancy. So we did just look at worry, but there are other emotions that people express, and it would be interesting to see if we see similar relationships if we were looking potentially at fear or frustration. However, we do have such a strong base to grow from, and a lot of work is emerging, and we're starting to see a lot of interdisciplinary work, which is great. So people coming together from sociology, psychology, demography, geography, in order to, you know, build collaborations and help move the field forward. We do think, you know, given that this is a current issue that people are facing right now, that working together is the way forward in order to come up with the best research in the most timely fashion. And so just a quick thank you, and here is our information if you would like to get in touch.
Thank you both. That was a very interesting paper. I'm not seeing anything immediately in the Q&A box, but I have one observation and one suggestion. So I'm very interested in your distinction between direct impacts, indirect impacts, and overarching awareness impacts. And it strikes me that there are parallels there with the prevalence of crime, experience of crime. So you might have been directly affected by being a victim of crime. You might be indirectly affected, maybe a family member or someone you know. But then, of course, a lot of fear of crime or unease can be stimulated by some sort of overarching awareness factor, reports of crime in the media, various coverage, and I suppose that would go for a lot of other issues. So if you could find ways of sort of operationalizing these as three different types of sort of predictor, if you like, that would be really interesting, wouldn't it? And then,
yeah, I actually have never drawn that parallel before with crime. I think that's really interesting. Might be another avenue too to kind of tap into some literature and try to draw parallels. Thank you.
good. And the second one was specifically around what the ESS has to offer. So you mentioned in a very early commentary on a slide, you mentioned the concept of self-efficacy. And of course, ESS does have, or certainly did, at some points in the cycle, measures of political efficacy. But of course, it's always had a sort of related variable, which is political interest. And that's a potential other sort of variable that it might be interesting to put into the mix as a sort of a supplementary measure of some of the things that you were already measuring elsewhere.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you very much. I saw Alina taking notes. That's perfect.
So thank you once again. That was super. We're now going to move on to our second paper of the afternoon. And this is from Elisabetta Mannoni from Central European University. And here she is. Elisabetta, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I will share my screen now. Can everybody see it? It should be the case. Okay, so thanks a lot. It's my pleasure to be here and to follow on Gina and Alina's presentation, given the topic. So I would say that we now sort of shift from the emotional sphere and the attitudinal sphere, and we jump towards the action sphere in a sense. So this research that I'm going to present today is indeed a work in progress So any feedback or a suggestion is going to be very, very welcome. And it is part of a broader project for my doctoral dissertation. So what I'm focusing on is this sort of like gap between attitudes towards the environment and pro-environmental behavior, a gap that we know exists, it's no surprise, and trying to understand it a little bit more, and to see how this varies depending on the type of pro-environmental behavior that we focus on. So for this research of today in particular, the type of pro-environmental behavior I'm going to focus on is the vote choice. So something that I call pro-environmental voting, and I'm going to tell you something more about this in a minute. So just to give you a little bit of context, what we know so far is that exactly there is this gap between attitudes and behavior, not just on climate change and like environmental protection, but in general, like in a lot of several relevant sociopolitical issues. So environmental concern and pro-environmental behavior is just an instance of this. And, it is just enough to even think about ourselves and how concerned most of us probably are about this issue, and then yet how difficult it is for us to translate this concern and this worry into everyday sustainable actions. So as I said before, it is no surprise, social psychology, but also behavioral economics have been providing us for a lot of explanation to justify why this gap is there, why we fail so miserably very often to actually bridge it. We have a lot of information and evidence on how to devise a useful strategy that might prompt eventually desirable behavior, in this case, desirable sustainable behavior. Let's just think about green nudges, evidence-based policymaking. What I'm wondering, though, for this specific research is whether we can actually consider voting for pro-environmental parties or candidates as an instance of pro-environmental behavior. Instead of, I don't know, just focusing on, for instance, reducing meat consumption or taking a train rather than flying, and so on and so forth. If yes, how would this specific instance of pro-environmental behavior relate to environmental concern? So the broader research question that I'm trying to tackle in the doctoral dissertation, among others, is whether in general belonging to different social groups will make a difference in how individuals eventually behave toward the environment, given that they have a certain level of environmental concern. And this is crucial, this last part, because mostly what I'm doing is focusing on just that section of the society which is growing increasingly and massively, who actually declares to be like environmentally concerned. So we've been focusing for decades by now on trying to sort of push people somehow to be more aware about the issue, and we might have achieved a certain degree of success in that case. So environmental concern, if we check any kind of survey, not just the ESS, but also others, we see that over time, like the percentage of people who declare to be very concerned about global warming is actually be increasing. So we just focus on those to see how we can sort of understand better the variables that play a role in these people failing to then behave consistently with this extent of concern. And for the research of today in particular, the focus is going to be on whether belonging to different generations, younger or older generations, actually make a difference in how this individual manifests their environmental concern through voting behavior, through pro-environmental voting. So some streams of literature that I sort of heavily rely on. First of all, this everything that we know about the fact that attitudes and intentions, despite the fact that they have been very often used in the past as proxies for behavior, they actually are very often not good predictors of it. Political participation, the idea that political participation and therefore also pro-environmental behavior might take several different forms. It doesn't have to be necessarily just joining the protest for Friday for Future movement. It can be exactly as we were saying before, reducing meat consumption. It can be choosing to live in a smaller house and so on and so forth. It can also be voting for a party that actually takes care of the issue. All the literature on pro-environmental voting behavior that tells us that these types of behavior tend to be heavily influenced by psychological variables we were mentioning before, self-efficacy, also response efficacy, moral obligation, and so on, and situational variables. And by this, what BAR means here is Well, of course, context-dependent variables, social demographic variables, among which age, of course, and also the extent to which we are sort of aware of the impact that any specific behavior might have, in terms of, I don't know, CO2 emissions, or like whether a certain behavior is more impactful than another. And then for what concerns voting behavior, a couple of things to keep in mind, in particular in this case, is that to some extent, generations more than age may play a key role in the vote choice, meaning not just being 20 today, being 20, 30 years from now, being 20, 30 years ago, but more than that, being 20 in this particular moment in time, right? 20, I'm just saying a number, an age like another, but the idea that it is the generation more than the age, meaning it is being socialized to politics in a specific period in time, in a specific context, that may count more than age itself. And finally, of course, the idea that voting behavior depends on a variety of different variables, context-related, institution-related variables. Therefore, it would really make perhaps not much sense to just focus on one country or like one specific context, but we should sort of try to like aim to have as a broad scope as possible in investigating this. So what are my two main hypotheses? Well, the first one is, let's say, age-related, and the second one is generation-related. So the first one is that younger voters who are individually environmentally concerned are more likely to engage with pro-environmental voting compared to environmentally concerned older voters. And the second one is that among the group of environmentally concerned voters, those who belong to two specific generations, so the millennials and the Generation Z, are more likely to engage with pro-environmental voting compared to the older ones. So how I tackle this, how I try to test this hypothesis, I needed data that would be relevant time-wise, so as fresh as possible. I really think it does not make much sense to nowadays, and I think in this Gina and Alina really played a great assist. It really does not make much sense to focus on this issue, to try to tackle this question using data, in particular for this specific case, that would be too outdated, right? A lot has been going on, so probably also data that will come in the future might be even more relevant, and we should try to sort of be updated as updated as possible. And COVID might also be playing a role in this case, but in particular, what I hoped to tackle with this last release from ESS was all the effect of Friday for Future movement, right? So it started in 2018, and this release from the round 10 from ESS was collected from 2020 and 2022. So far, we have data from 10 countries. The second release, I just realized it's going to be, it's supposed to be released tomorrow, apparently. So I really look forward to integrate data from these more countries. And it was particularly useful because also it did include measures of attitudes towards the environment with a very clear question about, which is the same question that Alina and Gina also used, about whether, how worried the person is about the environmental issue, about climate change. And also there were questions measuring voting behavior. I also included in this analysis to sort of assess the greenness of parties and sort of establish what a vote choice, to what extent a vote choice would be more pro-environmental than another. Data from the Chapel Hill expert survey, which I found in this more useful than other similar surveys because it provided not only information on the stance towards the issue of environmental protection of each given party, but also how salient the issue of environmental protection will be for them. So not just telling us once the party has to take a position, a stance on the issue, how they would side, but also how, in a sense, how likely they would be to actually push this agenda forward, right? So the first thing to do was to sort of try to conceptualize this pro-environmental voting, which had not been done to the best of my knowledge before, by measuring so that this greenness of parties, and then to test the predictive ability of these two variables, generation and age, through regression analysis. So how to conceptualize pro-environmental voting? As I said before, chess has two variables. One is this environment and the other one is envirosilence. So environment was basically measuring the position that a party would take on environmental sustainability vis-a-vis the economy. So it would get a 0 if it would favor environment more than the economy, and 10 if it would favor economy over environment. And then envirosilence would actually measure the salience of the environmental sustainability issue in the party's public stance in 2019. So what I did was, first of all, to revert environment so that actually the higher the value, the more concerned the party would be. And then I calculated the greenness of the party as a product of these two variables. So basically each individual eventually would have either like it would have a value that ranges from 0 to 100, where 0 would be like a very known pro-environmental vote choice, and a 100 like the most pro-environmental vote choice that one could take. As for the age and generation, where age is just the variables of age in years, and the generation, I used the classification of Pew Research Center on this. So we have silent generation, which in this case it was probably like the least, like the smallest group, let's say, in terms of observation. Baby boomers, a very big group of observations we had, then Generation X, millennials, and Generation Z. And then finally, I actually did not use all the observations in the round, but just a part of it. So as I said at the beginning, my goal was to only focus on those respondents who actually declare to be at least nominally committed to this issue, right? Who said to be very worried, at least, or extremely worried about the environment. I would assign the score 1 for this attitude to them, and then only conduct the analysis on these respondents, which one may say maybe it's not a lot of respondents, but it actually amounted to around 36% of the total sample. And so we can go straight to the results. We have the two models, one with age and the other one testing actually the generation. We see that they are both sort of, in a sense, confirming the expectation, the hypothesis. So we see that as people get older, they also get less likely to vote, sort of to manifest their environmental concern through their vote choice. Whereas on the generation, it also seems that compared to the silent generation, well, like millennials seem to be actually those where we have like the highest statistically significant sort of effect, less so for the Generation Z, which is what I found perhaps the most surprising. And there was actually some sort of relevance also for the Generation X, which I actually did not include. And so as for what I could take out of this, well, younger environmentally concerned individual did seem to vote more consistently with their attitude towards the environment compared to older voters. And generation might seem to play a role, though it's the effect, as I was saying before, of the Generation Z in particular, which should be the one which is actually the most involved in the Friday for Future movements, seem to be less significant than expected. And then a couple of questions or doubts, a thing that I'm still sort of working on and struggling with. On the one hand, whether there should be an alternative way or a better way of conceptualizing this pro-environmental voting, if I should calculate it, this greenness of the party in a different way than just by sort of computing this product of these two variables. I've been discussing this with some colleagues, but I really welcome any suggestion or input that may come today. And then, well, as for the generation effect, I think that perhaps, of course, it would be much sort of more meaningful to have possibly panel data or sort of to track whether there is some sort of change over time. The reason why I can't do this right now is because I would then lack the proper information on the greenness of the party, right? So I'm using two different data sets, and while for the ESS I might have different rounds over time, I may not necessarily have the same variable tracked by the chess dataset over time as well. And I am looking forward to integrating this second release starting from tomorrow already, and see what further insights may come from that. I think that's pretty much it from my side. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was another very interesting paper. So I'm not seeing immediate questions in the box. Again, I have a couple of observations and suggestions. So I thought this is very interesting. I've done a little bit of playing around with generation and ESS myself. And a couple of observations. One of the things that always interests me about this generation thing is that what defines a generation is, as you said, it's something to do with sort of a coming of age effect normally, that you come to adulthood normally at a particular time. But of course, as you say yourself, we tend to always fall back on the same definitions of generation, the same dates every time. And of course, depending on the outcome of the variable of interest, the Y variable, the kind of event that might affect you coming of age is different from the ones that are, standard used into the generation literature. And of course, we're now locked into this classification where it's always going to be 15 years before there's a new generation. So that's sort of interesting and sort of quite frustrating, isn't it? But I suppose it would be still possible to play around with different cuts in the data, or even smaller cuts, where you simply cut by 5 years, obviously smaller n, but that would be sort of just interesting in terms of slicing up the data. And then comment you made about the problem with greenness, with not being able to take the Chapel Hill. I mean, I suppose there are a couple of sort of shortcuts to that. One would be to sort of turn a blind eye to the possibility of parties evolving their positions, and simply, take that as a snapshot and sort of work it back. And the second thing, of course, is the lack of we don't have those questions about environmental awareness right at the start of ESS. They only sort of came into the core later on, and that would have allowed you to get a bit further along the generation age issue. Because as I understood it, the generations in your model were essentially really just sort of age groupings, weren't they? Because it was a single snap. So we weren't actually, we weren't seeing any sort of true generational shift. They were basically proxies for the age groups, which is as far as you could go. So yes, if it was possible to sort of freeze the idea of greenness of the parties, it might be possible to find sort of other data sets, or certainly to keep persevering with ESS in future waves as you move through your career, which I'm sure will be long and fruitful. Okay, I'm not seeing any other supplementary questions. Thank you very much, Elisabetta. That was a fantastic talk, and good luck with the rest of your PhD.
Thanks a lot.
So we now move to our third paper, which is slightly different tack, approaching the European energy crisis from the demand side. And this is Julian. You have the floor, sir.
Hello, everyone. I hope one can see me, my slides, and also hear me. And then I will start. So hello, everyone. My name is Julian. And oh, that was the second slide already. Just okay. I'm from the IK3, the research center in Jülich, based in Germany. And the topic of my presentation today is, as already said, approaching the European energy crisis from the demand side, energy use of private households in Europe. And I'm going to expand on that topic in 5 sections. The first is going to be an introduction to the topic. The second section is going to be about the data that I used, same as Gina and Alina, the 8th round of the European Social Survey. And third section, I'm going to explain the modeling approach that we chose. And in the 4th section, I'm going to present the results of our scenario analysis. And in the last section, I will conclude. So starting with the introduction, here I brought a figure which shows the change of gas prices for European household consumers in the first half of 2022 compared to the average gas price of the years 2019 to 2021. And we see that on average, the gas prices increased by 34% in the year 2022 in the aftermath of the Russian aggression against Ukraine. So with that, we're in the midst of the gas crisis we faced this year. And as a reaction to that development, European households decreased their gas demand already by an average of 13% across the month January to October of the year 2022, again, compared to the average gas consumption in previous years. And furthermore, we see that those countries with particularly high gas price increases, such as Denmark and Estonia, also rank at the top of the European countries with the largest decrease in gas demand. So this small introduction brings us to our research question, which is what are influencing factors on households and gas demand and energy behavior in more general terms? And for that, we use, as already said, the 8th round of the European Social Survey, and we utilize this data to estimate a multinomial logic model in order to simulate the energy behavior of European households. On the next section, we'll present the data that we used and take a closer look at that. So again, the 8th round of the European Social Survey, and we chose that because it entails a specific survey module, which was of interest to us, which is on public attitudes to climate change, energy security, and energy preferences. And from this data, we chose as the dependent variable of our model on the survey item, in your daily life, how often do you do things to reduce your energy use? So this question is going to be central to the model that we calibrated. And we utilize 4 socioeconomic and 4 attitudinal survey items as independent model variables. And we're going to expand on that in the following. So the survey item, in your daily life, how often do you do things to reduce energy use? We aggregated the categories to 4 for our model. So we have the categories that people do hardly ever something, sometimes very often, and always something to reduce energy use. And we see that older age groups tend to be actually more conscious about their energy use, as we see on the percentage increasing across the columns from the young age group to the middle age group to the old age group. That brings us to our next survey item, which is an independent model variable, and which asks, how worried are you that energy may be too expensive for many people in your country? And having in mind that this data is actually from the year 2016, 2017, we already see that the majority of people are somewhat worried to very worried about too expensive energy prices, and that these energy price worries also increase. And the next variable is, how much do you trust politicians? And in the years 2016-17, we see that trust in politicians was already relatively low, with an average of 3.75 on a scale from 0 to 10, with a little variance across age groups. And then the next survey item is asking the respondents how much they identify with a person who strongly believes that people should care for nature and the environment. And we see that the majority of people actually identify with such a person and thus care for nature and the environment. And we also see that this identification with such a person also increases over the age groups. So it's positively correlated with age according to the data here. And then the last item that we're looking at is how much have you thought about climate change before today? We already saw that, I think, in the first presentation. And here we also already see that the majority of people have thought about climate change sometimes to a lot, and that the variance across the age groups is quite low. And so this shall be enough for the short introduction or analysis of the base data that we used. Now coming to the methodology that we applied. So we were calibrating, or we calibrated a so-called multinomial logit model, some type of regression model. And key to such a model is a utility function, which is calculated for each behavioral choice options. And the choice options that we are simulating either that a household hardly ever does something to reduce energy use. This is the first option. And the second one is that they sometimes do it. Or the third one is that they do it very often. And the last one, that they always try to reduce their energy use. So 4 choice options here. And it's important to have these choice options in mind because they will be, and we will going to expand on that later on. And this utility function is based on the independent model variables that we introduced earlier and during the estimation process of our multinomial logit model. We are calibrating the weights of each of these independent model attributes, and the weights basically indicate how important they are for the explanation of the observed energy behavior. So the larger the weight, the more important the attribute. So coming to the analysis of the parameters that we, the model weights basically that we estimated. Here for the first item, how worried are you that energy may be too expensive for many people in your country? And we estimated 4 weights, 1 for each choice option, for each survey item. And we see that these worries about too expensive energy prices are actually positively correlated with an energy sufficient behavior, meaning that if people are more worried about too expensive energy prices, the probability increases that they actually show a reduction of energy use or more often or even always. And coming to the next survey item, the net household income, there we see actually a negative correlation with energy sufficient behavior. So if a household indicates that they have a high household income, the probability decreases that this household will always do something to reduce their energy use, and the probability increases that they will never do something to reduce their energy use. The next item is the identification with a person who strongly believes that people should care for nature and look after the environment. And this visualization is a bit counterintuitive because one would expect a positive correlation here. We see a negative correlation because the scale is actually inverted. So a high identification has a low value, and the low identification has a high value. So in the conclusion on the bottom here, we have a bit complicated double negation. A rejection of the identification with nature and the environment is negatively correlated with energy sufficient behavior and vice versa. So basically, goes along with our expectations here. And the next survey item is how much have you thought about climate change before today? I think we also saw that survey item before. And we see, according to our expectations, a positive correlation with energy sufficient behavior, such that the probability to do something to reduce energy use in your household increases for the choice option often and always if people have thought about climate change before a lot. The last item we're looking at is how much do you trust politicians? And there we don't see a clear positive or negative correlation, but we see that an increased trust in politicians is actually positively correlated with more moderate views, and that the probability to show more extreme views, such as answering with "I do never something to reduce the energy use" or "I always do something to reduce the energy use," have a lower probability if the trust in the politicians increases. So that brings us from the model results to the scenario analysis, in which we want to analyze how the behavior of the households actually changes if we change the independent model variables. And therefore, we came up with 4 different scenarios. On the x-axis, we varied the trust in politicians so that we have on the right-hand side an increase in the trust in politicians in the 2 scenarios with plus 50%, and on the left-hand side, a decrease by minus 50%. On the y-axis, we vary the worry about high energy prices, and in the bottom 2 scenarios, we assume the status quo of the worry about too high energy prices, which is already between somewhat to very worried. And in the top scenarios, we increase these worries to extreme worries about high energy prices, maybe going in line with current developments in the gas crisis at the moment. So coming to the scenario results for the young age group, let me explain the visualizations here a little bit. So on the bottom, we have the results for the normal energy price worry scenarios. So the bottom 2 scenarios on the in the visualization before, and in the top, we have the results for the extreme energy price worries. And on these 4 bars here, the gray bars, they represent the choice probability and the base data. And the first bars, they visualize the results of the reference scenario, so with no variation of energy price worries and trust in politicians. And we expect a close match of the first bars here with the gray bars. And if that's the case, we can conclude that we have a sufficient model fit, so that our model fits the base data basically, and we see that is true. And so we say, yeah, the model is good. And then the second bar visualizes the results for a reduction in the trust in politicians. And the second bar visualizes an increase in the trust in politicians by 50%. What we see here is that if we increase the trust in politicians by 50%, we see that the probability of the choice option that we often do something to reduce energy use increases, and the choice probabilities for only sometimes and never decrease. So on average, we have a trend towards a more energy sufficient behavior if the trust in politicians increases, and the vice versa effect if the trust in politicians decreases, visualized by that bar here. And then, if we now increase the worries about too high energy prices to extreme, and then we see that the probability to often and always do something to reduce energy use increases compared to the base data, to the reference scenario, which is visualized by the black dotted line. And the probability to only never or only sometimes do something to reduce energy use decreases. So if people are more worried about too high energy prices, they tend to show more energy sufficient behavior. coming to the results of the middle-aged group. Again, we start our observation down here, and we see that in comparison to the young age group, the middle age group actually shows an increased energy sufficient behavior, because the choice probabilities to often and always do something to reduce energy use are higher. And for the effects of the change in political trust and the change in the energy price worries, we actually observe the same effects as for the young age group. And coming to the old age group of people above the age of 65, we again observe the same trends for the variation of energy price worries and political trust. And we also see that the old age group again has a higher probability than the middle age group and the young age group in regard to showing energy sufficient behavior, as the probability here to always do something to decrease energy use is higher than in the two previous groups, which are shown by the orange and the red brownish bars here. And this brings us to the conclusion already. So what we see is, or what we observe is, that we have a clear correlation between most of the selected survey items and the observed energy behavior, such that if we increase worries about energy prices, thoughts about climate change, importance of nature and the environment, and also age, this goes in line with a higher energy sufficient behavior. An increase of the household's net income has a negative correlation with energy sufficient behavior, so it actually reduces this. And looking at the attribute trust in politicians, if this is increased, this actually strengthens only more moderate views, but also has a positive effect on energy sufficient behavior. That brings me to the end of my presentation, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Julian. That was very interesting indeed. So just while I'm waiting to see if there's anything coming up in the Q&A. So I have a couple of pieces of clarification, really. I did my best to follow the graph. The visualizations were quite ingenious, because there's a lot to try and get across in those scenarios, isn't there?
Yes, that's true.
Firstly, a very quick question. With the where you're talking about the relationship between an influencing factor and the energy sufficient behavior, in each of those cases, was that controlling for all the other things, or were these essentially just bivariate relationships?
No, the others were also controlled for, like this is in this multinomial logit model. So yeah,
okay,
it's not only a bivariance analysis.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Super, thanks. The second thing was, it struck me that this is a real what you might call a real head scratcher for policymaker, because there are so many complications here. So you can see that on the one hand, sort of worries about cost are a very effective stimulus for being more energy sufficient, but largely if you're poor. And of course, so from a very crude point of view, one might say, well, if this is a cost related thing, let's tax big. But of course, when it's something like, something that's absolutely essential, like domestic energy, that's clearly not an ethical it's not an ethical policy, particularly as it doesn't seem to bother people who are wealthy. So that's a real policy dilemma, is it not?
Definitely, maybe we also should have a look at the social acceptance of such measures. So this would be like the yeah, thing, which is, yeah, of course you can increase the energy prices and yeah, do not come up with subsidies for energy prices and gas prices. And in the end, you will have, I guess, as the model results show, less energy demand and less gas demand. But yeah, you pay for that, and that you lose the social acceptance for your policies, I guess. So yeah, good point, definitely. Yeah.
Certainly something that was much discussed in the UK in relation to the energy price guarantee. That there wasn't really any incentive to limit your consumption if you were able to pay.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, I was interested. So you say that in each case the models control for all the other things when you're looking at the influencing factor. Suppose I'm a policy maker and I'm kind of saying, well, I can see that there's multiple factors that might drive energy sufficient behaviour, but I need to put limited resources, civil service time or money or whatever it is, into a couple. Is it possible from what you've done here to kind of tell us which of these factors has the largest predictive effect?
Yes, actually, one could. I would have to look at the exact results again, but you could tell from, for example, if you use the model to do more further scenario analysis, also by looking at the significance of each of these factors. But I think what we also see is that the elasticity of the behavior is quite low. So in the scenario analysis, for example, we varied the trust in politicians quite extremely, like by plus 50%, minus 50%, and we only saw a difference by like a few percent to the plus and minus. So the elasticity is quite low, which yeah, also tells us that we can do something, but the effect will always be quite small. So maybe we shouldn't aim for like single policies, but policy packages to have a substantial effect on the actual behavior. But yeah, as already said, cost is the main driver, and yeah, but for a precise answer, I'd have to look in the results more closely, to be honest.
And possibly also from the way you present the visualizations between the three age groups, might it also be something where you're sending particular policy messages to targeted groups?
Yeah, we see that actually older people, they already show an increased energy sufficient behavior. So maybe it would make sense to target more the younger groups more strongly to also encourage them. Yeah.
Good.
But they react quite similarly actually to the different policy packages. So.
Okay. Thank you very much. Very good answers. I'm a lot more illuminated than I was before. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
We
for
now
your
move
answers.
to our fourth paper of the afternoon, and this is from Laurène from Leuven, and this is looking at the effect of COVID-19 pandemic on young people's perspectives on the future. Laurène, you have the floor now.
Thank you. I will share my screen. Yes. Okay. Thank you very much. I'm really happy to present here. I want first to excuse myself. My voice is not that really good today. So I will present the work we did for the European Commission as part of the SSM, so social situation monitor, for the European Commission. It's a really small project, a research note that is only descriptive. Okay, so nothing compared to what has been presented already. And indeed, we try to see the effect of the COVID-19 pandemic on young people in the future. I will present my presentation. So first I will talk about the context. Why is it so interesting to study young people's perspective during the COVID-19 pandemic? Then I will briefly discuss what we found in other surveys that we use as a grey literature review, if you want. And then I will focus on why I'm here today. So the new survey that we created, that will conclude. So as we all know, so there was a global COVID-19 pandemic, something totally new that we all have to adapt to. What was, as we all know, so there was some travel and restriction, schools, of university, of education facility, of childcare, also a lot of hygiene regulation. So this was really disruptive for everybody, and in 2020, in 2021, and in other countries in the world, it's still not totally over. But here in this research paper, we really focus on young people, so people below 30 years old. There are reasons to believe actually that young people were disproportionately affected by the pandemic for several reasons. So first, the school to work transition was especially hard, especially in 2020. Okay, that the last months of education could be online, remote, without a real contact with the teachers, some grades that were cancelled. So it was really blurred, and started then a new job during the 19 pandemic was also quite difficult. There were few offers on the market, and also you can start your work with all your colleagues being working online. So this transition was especially hard. We also find in the literature that young people already worked in sectors that were most affected by the pandemic restrictions, such as accommodation and food services, for example. So despite their lower likelihood of developing severe complications from the virus, younger generations were in fact more exposed to economic and social consequences of the pandemic. Already before the pandemic, they were in a more precarious situation in the labor market, working on temporary contracts, for instance, more often than older groups. So they are more likely in 2020, 2021, 2022, more likely to report experiences loneliness, depression, and social isolation because of the pandemic. So that's why the European Commission was really interested to focus on this group of people, and wanted to know what was already done by previous surveys. So that's exactly what we did. We did a literature review of reports and also of findings from other European surveys on the topic. So we use mainly 4 sources. The first one is the OECD Young People's Concern during the COVID-19, the results from Risk That Matter survey from 2020, so the year of the start of the pandemic. The second one is an ILO survey, the Global Survey on Youth and COVID-19, also from 2020. The third one is, I think, widely known e-survey from Eurofound, the Living, Working and COVID-19 e-survey. You have there several ways in 2020 and also in 2021. And the last one that we really deeply looked into is the European Parliament, a flash Eurobarometer youth survey, this in 2021. So based on these 4 main surveys, we, together with the Commission, decided to highlight 4 main topics that were especially important during this period. Employment, well-being, perspective on the future, and trust in the institution. So, of course, and we spent quite some time in the paper to explain this, there are some differences in the survey. So it's sometimes difficult actually to compare the results. The methodology are different. Also, the definition of what young people is or are is different. So for some survey, it's below 30. For other, it's below 31. Some young people start at age 16. For other, it's 18. But yeah, on general, on average, we try to find some global and general conclusion from these 4 surveys. So regarding employment, they found that young people experience more often job-related disruption, financial difficulties than the rest of the population, than all the groups. So job-related disruption could be job loss, reduced working hour, pay cut, unpaid leave also, for instance. And in many countries, we observed higher unemployment rates, especially at the very beginning of the pandemic in 2020. A second and very important topic, and it was already discussed, and I will come back to this later in the presentation, is well-being and mental health. So from the very beginning of the pandemic, international institutions were really interested by this topic for the global population, but also for young people. So now, and nearly 3 years after the start of the pandemic, you have many reports, a new survey dedicated to this. What they found is that young people are more likely to report worsened self-reported mental health than older groups. This is really a general conclusion. In the reports, in the survey, you can find different waves in different time. So especially for the second lockdown, it was especially hard when people thinking that, okay, it's again, I'm going to be alone in my apartment working online, remote. So the second lockdown was actually for young people the worst period. This self-reported risk of depression was particularly high among unemployed and inactive young people. It was also the case for all the groups, but it was higher for young people. And then men, on average, reported lower mental well-being than men for really different reasons, and especially for mothers, for women with children at home. It was in some countries really difficult to deal with the job and childcare and education at home. The next topic, is the perspective on the future. So this is a quite broad topic. Here we included general optimism about the future. And what those surveys found is that still it remained higher than for older people, older groups. They were more concerned about not being financially secured in old age, something that we already found in other literature. Again, here, women were more concerned than men. But that's also something that we find for some other years. And regarding the political or really high topics I concerned for the future, we found 3 main topics that came back from at least two surveys that I mentioned before. One main topic was tackling poverty and social inequality. The second one is combating climate change and protecting the environment. We already discussed this in the previous presentation. And the last one is combating unemployment and lack of jobs. Finally, the last topic that we will also discuss in our survey is trust in institutions. So as I mentioned already in the introduction, during the COVID pandemic, government had to put in place measures to act quite rapidly, sometimes to contradict themselves, to change rapidly, measure from one to another, apply mask first and then not applying mask then. So we were wondering if actually the trust in the institutions was changed because of that, was impacted by this period. What they found is that young people's trust in the EU is still higher, was higher than the trust in the government, and always higher than for older people trust in the EU. Women had more trust in the government than did men, and that's something that was also observable before. And the level of education here has an impact, as young people with higher education reported stronger trust in the government. So based on this is the first part of the report. The second part is about the new survey that we created based on these findings. So we discussed this with the European Commission, and they were interested actually in 5 questions. And I will now present the main results from those questions. So again, it's only descriptive. I can't really say that it's a causal effect. It was not the purpose of the paper. But still, we can see something that is a good start, maybe to start further real causal research after that. So the new survey was launched online by a subcontractor in May this year. It was in 5 EU countries. We tried to select countries so that we have different geographical representation of the EU. So it was in Denmark, in France, in Germany, in Italy, and in Poland. It's a small sample, so I will come to that later regarding the limits, but still, it's a representative sample of 800 people in each country, and we have 400 that are less than 30 years old. We adapt the weights, and we have weights based on age, gender, and education. So as I explained it before, we create this new survey using questions that were already existing before, and that's where actually we use the ESS survey a lot. So we selected 5 questions together with the Commission, and we implemented the exact wording in different national language for cover nearly all the topics I mentioned before, except employment. So I will now present the main findings, results for these 5 questions. In the paper, we have more findings than that. We especially did the difference between women versus men, and also the differences between different education level. What I will present now is only the differences between young people versus older people. So the first question is from the Eurobarometer Future of Europe survey. And here we ask if the respondent agree or disagree with the fact that his or her voice counts in the EU. They can be totally disagree to totally agree. What I show you here is the share of population agreeing that their voice count in the EU, so that people that were agree or totally agree. What we found here is that we have differences across country. For 3 for younger people, for 3 countries, so Germany, Denmark, and Italy, the share of young people agreeing with this statement decreased, especially in Germany and in Denmark, as you can see. It was the opposite situation in France and in Poland. In 2022, the share of population was a bit higher, nearly the same in Poland, a bit higher in France, and we have nearly the same mirrored results for older people. For France, one explanation, again, it's only descriptive, but can be that France, when we had the online survey, when it was open, France was the presidency of the Council of the EU. So in France, there were a lot of news about what was happening at the EU agenda, so it could have impacted the results there. If you compare young and old people, as I mentioned before, you don't see a lot of really big differences, significant differences here. It's nearly the same. The same question here, but not at the EU level, but at the country level. Again, just by looking at those 2 graphs, we don't see major differences across age groups. We still have differences across countries, so the same country had the share decrease in Germany, in Denmark, in Italy for young people, but also in Poland for young people there compared to at the opposite for the EU. And in France, for young people, again, this share of people agreeing that the voice counted in their country increased a bit compared to 2020. For older people, you find nearly similar results, again, only with France having slightly higher share of people, but it's not significant. What could explain, again, this particularity of France is that 2022, was the year of the presidential election, the major election in France. So people were voted. So it could be also that the answer there are influenced by this election in spring 2022. Moving now to another institution that the Commission was interested in, but also that is really relevant here in the COVID-19 confidence is the confidence, COVID-19 pandemic, is the confidence in the education system. So as I briefly mentioned during the COVID-19, a lot of education facilities has to change and to adapt to remote teaching, sometimes to delete or to postpone exams. So we were wondering, actually, for young people, if the trust in the education system changed after the pandemic. So here we are using the question and previous data from the European Value Survey for different ways, so from the 80s till 2017 ways. And what you can see here on the graph is that for all countries, young people, older people, the share of the population with confidence in the system decreased. It's especially the case in Poland, right? And especially for young people. The decrease is a bit less important in Denmark, also for both young and old people, but on average, you can see a decrease, significant decrease, especially in Poland for the 2 age categories. The whole question is about subjective well-being, and here is the great added value of the European Social Survey. We use 10 rounds, the question was here, taking all things together, how happy would you say you are from a scale from 0 to 10? if you only look at previous waves, not the results from the HIVA survey in 2022, so the European Social Survey weights, you can see that on average, subjective well-being is between 7 and 8 for both young and old people, and that younger respondents always have a higher subjective well-being than older people, older than 30 years old. What is interesting here is that you can see a huge decrease, markedly huge decrease in 2020 with the HIVA survey, and also that we have a change here, so that the subjective well-being for older people is a bit higher than the one for young people, which was never the case before in the European Social Survey. And finally, the last question is the optimism about the future. So here is the question is, do you agree or disagree with the fact that you are optimistic about your future? From strongly disagree to strongly agree. You have here on those figures the share of population optimistic, so you agree or strongly agree with this statement. And again, and I will come back to this in the conclusion, we don't see significant differences between, on average, between younger and older respondents. In Germany, for older people, you can see a huge decrease in the share of population optimistic. The same in Denmark, in France, in all countries. For young people, the decrease in Germany, especially, is a bit lower. But if you look at the number in Denmark, so it is really striking, or in France, or in Italy, in Poland. So optimism about the future in 2022 was really lower than the one in 2012 or 2016. And I forgot to say, yeah, this is from the European Quality of Life Survey. It's a two-way in 2012-2016. I will briefly conclude then. We found really results in line with the previous findings in the literature from the other surveys. And I will come back to this, even though we have a different methodology here. What I kept repeating during my presentation is that in fact, we have small effects across age groups, except for subjective well-being. It decreased really markedly in 2022. Also for older people, as we saw, but for younger people, it was the lowest. It's written here. It reached the lowest level measure since the ESS started in 2002. Regarding the other questions, so more young people agree that the voice contact in their country than in the EU, but both shares fell markedly for the two questions. The share of people expressing confidence in the education system also fell a lot, especially in France, in Italy, in Poland. The trust was still a bit higher for all the respondents. And as we saw in the last slide, there was a large fall in optimism about the future. It was even greater for people for all the people in Germany and in France. So this is the research note that we wrote for the European Commission. It will probably be published in spring, but it takes a lot of time. As I mentioned before, it's only descriptive, but it could be useful information maybe to start other papers and other research topic from there. We were careful in the paper to stress that we cannot really compare the different questions, even if we did, because we are asked for, but it's not exactly the same sample size. We have 400 young people. In some international survey, we have thousands sometimes. It's only descriptives, and what we have to take also into account is that so this was launched online in May 2022. So it was a few months after the start of the war in Ukraine. And it's only descriptive statistics, it's really difficult to say that it's really the results, the effect of the COVID pandemic. It can also be, especially for optimism about the future, impact of the war in Ukraine. So maybe what we will do, we will discussing this in our group, it's to see and to use European Social Survey waved in more in depth and see what is feasible to do with and the coming waves, also probably to see what is possible to do regarding this impact of the war in Ukraine. So thank you very much. You can contact me through this email, or we will be in the email list, and I will be happy to answer all the question. Sorry for my voice.
You did very well. It's not much worse than mine at the moment, actually. Thank you very much. That's very interesting. I think it's a very good example of what you can do with descriptive statistics, where you've got a range, you can draw upon a range of surveys that have dealt with either similar formulations of a concept, or in some cases exactly the same question. I don't think you should belittle the role of some solid descriptives, because they still remain to be explained, right? It'll be very interesting to see if the full round 10 data from ESS, and indeed the round 11 data, can replicate the HIVA drop. So that would be sort of very interesting to see. So it's partly a methodological question, I suspect. So one of the things that you say yourself was quite striking was that the shape of although there were country differences, the shape of the skyscrapers, if you like, the bar charts, were pretty much consistent between the younger group and the older group. And I can appreciate that with a reasonably small N, you would be content with simply a slice into two. I'm just wondering whether we might have seen differences, rather as we did in a previous paper, between maybe the middle-aged are more similar to the young than the much older.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And so, whether either we had whether it would have been simply a one-way split, but at 40 instead of 30, or whether there had been if we had enough N to split into 3. I speculate whether we might have seen different types of message. But I would appreciate the number of cuts you would make is in proportion to the N you have available, but it's just a thought, really.
Yeah, no, it's a good idea actually, and this can be also a thought if we want to replicate again the survey with the 11th waves for ESS. So thanks a lot taking this comment. But
one message that was loud and clear was over the place of Italy in relation to the other 4 countries, was it not? That came through consistently on every measure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which again, merely descriptive statistics, but conveying consistent information.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Super, thank you very much, Laurène. So we move to our big finish. We've got one more paper. This is from Maria Symeonaki on perceptions of youth towards ICT. And this utilizes round 10 of ESS using a new module that was fielded in round 10. So very much looking forward to this. Maria, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. You see my screen. Thanks a lot for the introduction, Eric. I'm very happy to be here today presenting on this ESS Youth Online event. Presenting this study relating exactly as earlier said, the perceptions of youth towards information and communication technologies towards ICT, with data drawn from the ESS, providing also a cross-country comparison and a comparison also between two age cohorts. This study is joint work with Dimitris Barsanoglu, who is a professor at the Department of Sociology at the National and Kapodistrian University of Athens. Now, concerning the outline of the presentation, I will first provide the objectives and research questions of this study, information concerning the data that we have used, and actually we have used the 3 latest rounds from the ESS, and specifically the late rotating module included in round 10, which is called Digital Social Contracts in Work and Family Life. I will then describe the methodology that we have applied, the measures and composite indicators that were developed, and then provide the results and visualize parts of them on an online interactive map. It's called the Digimap, which we have developed in the context of Horizon 2020 European project called Digigen. Finally, I will give the conclusions of our research and a roadmap for future work. Now, the internet has long been identified as a mirror of social inequalities and a determinant of transformation in social stratification. So we strongly believe that quantitative indicators deriving from reliable large-scale sample surveys like the ESS might provide a clear picture on the digital habits, the digital skills, the confidence towards ICT, or what is called digital deprivation in Europe, giving well-founded estimates of one's digital life, whether they are subjective, the indicators like if someone feels confident towards ICT or has an interest towards ICT, or objective, the existence of an internet connection or a computer that they can use at home. Now, with this in mind, we examine the perspectives or the opportunities that the ESS provides for measuring perceptions towards ICT, but also for measuring for what is called the first and second digital divide. Now, having said that, we could say that our motivation and research questions can be summarized in the following. We would like to empirically examine, with the use of the ESS data, the perceptions of European youth towards ICT and compare it with the oldest cohort, measure the first digital divide, objective indicators like internet access from the year 2016 to 2020 for the younger individuals and compare with the oldest cohort, and provide information for the second digital divide, that is, for example, digital skills. We could also like to provide a cross-country comparison for the youngest cohort for perceptions towards ICT and the first and second digital divide. So there are, let's say, 3 areas of interest: perceptions towards ICT and indicators linked with the first digital divide, computer access or internet access, for example, and the second digital divide, digital skills and competencies. We use the ESS rounds 8, 9, and 10 for estimating access to the internet, and round 10 for perceptions towards ICT and digital skills. This will allow us to conceptualize digital inequalities in what is called digital deprivation, thinking, for example, that individuals with digital skepticism, individuals with no access to the internet and low digital skills are those who are in the worst position, those belonging in this intersection, the intersection of these 3 sets, which we could call individuals that are digitally marginalized. So, considering the methods that we have used regarding the methodology, indicators linked with these 3 areas or variables linked with these 3 areas were identified. A composite indicator of digital skills was developed. Measures were estimated for all participating countries and 2 different cohorts. The younger cohort, those aged between 15 and 35, and those aged from 35 years old and older. Now, in the ESS round 10 rotating module, respondents are asked specific questions regarding their perceptions of digital communication in general, which actually refers to mobile and online communication. These questions items give an indication of digital optimism and skepticism in the different participating countries. And more specifically, respondents are asked on a scale from 0 to 10, whether they believe that online and mobile communication exposes people to misinformation, undermines personal privacy, makes work and personal life interrupt each other, makes it easy to work from home or from a place of choice, and makes people feel closer to one another. And I will say here at this point, we heard about that earlier, that we have only 10 countries in the round 10. We are waiting for the rest to be released soon, like tomorrow. These are the countries that we see here. And concerning exposure to misinformation, there are discrepancies amongst age cohorts, but also cross-country differences. It is apparent that in some countries, like France and Estonia, respondents tend to believe more that ICT exposes people to misinformation than in others, for example, Bulgaria. Now, in most countries, except for Czechia, but mostly Croatia and Hungary, the younger groups tend to agree more that ICT exposes people to misinformation. On an average, young people tend to believe more that online and mobile communication exposes people to misinformation, but the difference is very slight. Now, when privacy undermining is examined, again, strong differences among countries are present, but also differences in the pattern as to who thinks that ICT undermines privacy more, the younger or the oldest cohort. And see, for example, the distribution in Bulgaria and Croatia, and Slovenia and Lithuania, where they are the other way around. And again, on the European average, young people tend to believe a bit less that online and mobile communication undermines personal privacy. Now, assessing whether online communication makes work and personal life interrupt each other, there are country differences and some differences between cohorts, for Estonia, for example, but on an average, both cohorts have the same perceptions around 10 on a 0 to 10 scale, with 10, as earlier said, corresponding to completely. And now respondents tend to agree more that online and mobile communication makes it easy to coordinate and manage activities as the scores are higher, with Croatia and Slovakia being the only two countries where the older generation agrees more to this statement. On a European average, younger individuals believe more that online and mobile communication makes it easy to coordinate and manage activities. Now, on the contrary, we see great differences between countries in using ICT for working from home or place of choice, with lower scores for Bulgaria and Croatia and higher for Finland and Estonia. On a European average, a slight difference exists in favor of the oldest age group, but the scores remain at the medium levels for both cohorts. And here we detect a more clear pattern. In almost all countries except one, that is Slovakia, young individuals believe stronger that ICT makes people feel closer to one another, and that is the biggest observed difference for these items questions. Younger respondents, therefore, clearly believe more that online and mobile communication makes people feel closer to one another, indicating a higher degree of digital optimism. Now, to capture the first digital divide, we use rounds 8, 9, and 10 and study the percentages of how respondents answered the literal question that was posed. People can use the internet on different devices, such as computer, tablets, and smartphones. How often do you use the internet on these or any other devices, whether for work or personal use? And the answer on a 1 to 5 scale, with 1 corresponding to never and 5 corresponding to every day. And in round 10, there is a more specific question. Imagine you wanted to access the internet. At which of these locations would you be able to do it? At home, at the workplace, on the move, and none of the above. And we focus, therefore, on those who answer none of the above. Now we see here the percentages for those that say that they never use the internet for the whole sample for the for the years 2016, 2019, and 2020, and the big differences between the two age groups. We have very small percentages from the younger cohort that are getting even smaller through the years, as is with the percentages for the older cohorts, but the figures are very different. And note here again that the countries for the latest round are only 10. Again, we see the discrepancies between the older and the younger generation, with almost 90% of the younger ones stating that they access the internet on an everyday basis for the 3 latest rounds of the ESS. Cross-country comparisons are made clear here, together with age differences for the year 2016, where countries like Finland, Norway, and Iceland, there are no respondents in the youngest cohort that say that they never access the internet. But in Israel and Hungary, the percentages are almost equal to 7% and 6% respectively. The percentages of no access corresponding to the oldest cohort in some countries are very, very high, with Russia exhibiting the highest, almost equal to 50%. The same goes for the year 2018, with Hungary having the highest percentage for the younger cohort and Bulgaria for the oldest cohort, almost 40%. And for the latest round, we notice again that there are strong differences between the two cohorts and amongst countries, with Slovakia exhibiting the highest percentage for the oldest cohort, and Hungary, Bulgaria, and Slovakia the highest for the younger cohort. Now, concerning the location now with round 10, at which individuals access the internet, and measuring those who say that they don't access the internet neither at home, nor at the workplace, nor on the move, we notice again that there are strong differences between the two cohorts and amongst countries, with Slovakia exhibiting a quite high percentage for both cohorts. Now, for the second digital divide, we use the latest round that includes these questions. How familiar are you with each of the following computer and internet-related items? Preference settings, advanced search, and PDF. And on a scale from 1 to 5, respondents answer with 1 corresponding to not at all and 5 to completely familiar. As expected, both age and cross-country differences are detected, with Finland having an almost 0% of young individuals stating that they are not at all or not very familiar with preference settings, with a similar picture for advanced search, and PDF having higher percentages for the oldest cohort, almost 60% for Bulgaria. Now, if we want to combine the 3 internet and computer skills together and get a validated measure of the respondents' digital skills, we see here that the values of the Chromebox A are very, very high, and further analysis show that we can combine these items together, as we have proceeded in aggregating the 3 items, forming a scale measuring digital skills that takes values between 3 and 15. And here we can see the respective graphs with higher values denoting increased familiarity. So Finland has the most digital skilled individuals, both for the youngest cohort and the older cohort. And for the youngest cohort, it is Bulgaria that shows the lowest degrees of digital skills. Now, to have a small cross-country comparison for only for the young individuals for perceptions, digital divide, and then the 2 digital divides, we can see here that the young individuals in Bulgaria are those that believe to a lesser degree that online communication exposes people to misinformation, and in France the most. Young individuals in Bulgaria are also those that believe the less that online communication undermines people's privacy, and those in Slovenia are the most. And on the other hand, young individuals in Hungary are those that believe in a lesser extent that online communication makes work and personal life interrupt each other much too often, in a way undermines work and life balance, and young individuals in Slovenia the most. Greater discrepancies are detected for the relation between online communication and the management of activities, where young Slovaks are the most, and the Finns the less skeptical on this matter. Concerning the ability to work from a distance, young people in Bulgaria have the most doubts, and in Estonia and Finland the least. And from the next distribution, it is apparent that respondents tend to agree more that online and mobile communication makes people feel closer to one another, with Estonians being the less convinced and the Czechs the most. As for the percentage of young individuals that respond that they never access the internet, whether for work or for any other reason, we have 0% for Estonia, France, and Lithuania, and 3.5% for Slovakia. We have transformed the digital skill scale on a 0 to 5 scale, and see here that young individuals from Finland are those that have the highest scores, and Lithuanians the lowest. Now, to come to our conclusions, first for the perception part, we could say that on an average basis, differences between cohorts are found mainly regarding online communication as a channel for misinformation, as a better way to manage activities, and even more to make people feel closer to one another. And in concern with the first and second digital divide, we see that between the years 2016 and 2020, the percentages of young individuals in Europe that claim they don't access the internet dropped from almost 2% to 0.7. Respective percentages for the oldest cohort decreased from 30% to 16% between the same years. In an analogous way, the percentages of those that access the internet every day increased for both cohorts, and young individuals are almost 30% more equipped with digital skills. And if we measure time spent on the internet on a typical day, it is apparent that there is about an hour and a half difference between age cohorts for all years. So there are about 4.5 years, hours for the youngest cohort, and 3 hours, about 3 hours for the oldest cohort. Now, in connection with this, we can see here in a proportion of that time spent on a 24-hour basis, which looks quite a lot considering the other activities that have to fit in a typical day. Now, I would like to use Digimap, as earlier said, which can be found in the URL depicted here or accessed through the Digigen's website, to show how these indicators can be or are already depicted on this or visualized on this online application. To give a very brief description of Digimap, Digimap is an online tool that visualizes indicators that are estimated from large-scale European and international sample surveys, like the ESS, but also the EU SILC, the PISA survey, the ICILS, etc. And these indicators reflect the use of information and communication technologies amongst children and young individuals in Europe. There are a large number of indicators estimated and visualized on Digimap already, about 70 indicators, and those reveal convergences and divergences among European countries. Apart from its main feature, that of facilitating users to observe discrepancies between European countries, the map provides descriptive statistical measures, the mean value, for example, maximum value or minimum value, for instance, and suitable graphs, and it offers the potentiality of downloading the estimated indicators in Excel form for further use, customized also country reports, and information concerning the estimation of the indicators. It covers a period from 2015 and onwards. So, the objective of this online tool was to reveal convergences and divergences among European countries concerning ICT use of young individuals, communicate relevant information at a glance the fastest possible as soon as new data are released. It also allows users to examine the evolution of each indicator through time for each country individually. It can identify measures of target and cross-country comparisons. It captures indicators referring to the first and second digital divide. It helps us follow the evolution of an indicator through time to see longitudinal trends. And we try to keep the map constantly updated so as to serve as a major source of information for those who are interested in this matter. And I would like to go here to show the use of the map, we can use this drop-down menu and choose one of the indicators that I've already we have already seen, the percentage of respondents that have no access or they don't access the internet for whatever reason. These are the spatial distribution of this indicator through this for the latest round. So we have these 10 countries, and the values of the indicators can be seen as we hover over the country. On the right-hand side, we see the minimum value, the maximum value, mean value, or the timeline of the mean value, how this has evolved from 2016 and onwards. And we can click, for example, on a country to see the position on this minimum and maximum bar. We can go further down to see the distribution in a descending order. So here we can see that for the year 2020, the percentage of young individuals that don't access the internet for no matter reason, what reason, is Slovakia with the highest percentage of 3.5. And then we have Hungary and the rest of the countries, Estonia and France and Lithuania, with almost 0%. For the highlighted country, the one that we have clicked on, we see the evolution of this indicator through the years. So we know that for Hungary, for the year 2016, the percentage was 5.6, and in the year 2018, it dropped in 3.1, if I remember, and then in 2020, it is equal to 2.4. And we can also go back in time to see the same indicator for the previous round of the ESS. So we can hover over these countries to see and to check the values of the indicators. And again, click on a country to highlight the country, or go further down to see the distribution for all the participating countries in the year 2018. And even further back to see the distribution of this indicator for the year 2016. And to this is we have used the ESS data for other also indicators, like the ones showing digital or online participation, digital citizenship, how people or if people respondents trust in politics, their own ability to participate in politics, etc. And go back here to see the next steps and ideas for future work. We start with getting the data for the rest of the countries for 2020 when they are released. We calculate measures and indicators, study digital skepticism and optimism scales, and if they can, these questions aggregated together. Perform correlation analysis with other variables when applicable, compare with other rounds of ESS, and compare objective with subjective measures. And some references here, and that's all from my part. Thanks a lot for listening.
Thank you for very interesting content and nice visualizations as well. I just had one observation question, really. So in common with the previous paper from HIVA, it was noticeable that there were really very minimal differences between the age groups on a whole range of measures. And I wondered whether one of the next steps you would think about would be to interact the age group with the level of digital skills, or in a way it seems more accurate to call it digital confidence.
Exactly.
Just wondering whether that was in the plans.
Yes, it would be very interesting to study this also. And it is very helpful because it is not only these questions, but other questions that we have in mind that has to do with with work, for example, and working from distance. And again, some questions also on the impact of COVID that we would like to examine. and they are all included in this rotating module, which was very, very interesting. Yes, that's a very good question. Thank you.
Yes, it's a fascinating module. In addition to its substantive benefits, it could almost have been designed as a sort of pioneering module for a survey that was thinking about transitioning to self-completion, because there's lots of interesting, relevant information there. Thank you very much, Maria. They give us a great finish to our afternoon. So thank you to everyone who's taken part. I think a lot of the material here, in terms of its emphasis on youth, very much plays into the Next Generation EU initiative, which of course is now a huge undertaking within the European Union. So thank you all for your papers. Thank you very much for attending, and please look out for our events in the new year, looking at rotating modules from the history of the ESS, and also a number of contributions using time series data to help us celebrate 20 years worth of ESS data. But for now, thank you and good afternoon.